Welcome everyone to another one of our Wednesday webinars here at the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. We are super excited today to have two trail builders based in Maine, Adam Craig and Max Southam. They'll introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their history. But really exciting to have it because Maine has a pretty exploding bike scene right now, and just want to kind of celebrate the trails and the progress we've made in building them. It's been pretty exciting. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Tandem Coffee. If you guys anyone's down in Portland, go grab some coffee at Tandem. Bike themed coffee, it works wonderfully for us. Um, cool. So we're going to start off today. So we have Adam Craig and Max Southam here, and I will have them introduce themselves as our guest. So Adam, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having us. And yeah, much appreciation to Bicycle Coalition of Maine for hosting this type of thing and just generally advocating for cycling in our fine remote state. Um, I'm Adam Craig. I grew up in Central Maine in a small town called Exeter. Went to Dexter High School and got into a pretty lucky life of professional bike racing for a couple of decades there. So just kind of wrapping that up and becoming a good backwoods trail builder.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Max, you want to take it?
Um, yeah, my name is Max Southam. I grew up in Bethel, Maine, um, and I raced bikes in middle and high school through college, and then have always kind of been building trails in Bethel because a lot of people now have ridden the trails of Bethel, but back when I was growing up, there wasn't much to ride on. So everything we rode we had to build. So yeah, kind of stuck to it, and it worked out to be a career.
Yeah, it's awesome to think that professional trail building is a career now, like a very viable career for a lot of people, which is so cool to see that change. Um, but so how do you guys find mountain biking?
Um, so I mean, I was lucky coming into the sport in the 90s when Maine had a really vibrant cross country racing scene. There was the Maine Mountain Bike Point Series that I'm sure people remember, like the little, there'd be a newspaper flyer that went around every year that had the schedule, and all the local shops would sponsor a race in their town or region. So yeah, just got into it through the local bike shop in Brewer, Maine, Pat's Bike Shop. Those guys were some of the fastest in the state. Scott and Troy just whipping up on everyone, and they would do public group rides during the week. So whatever teenager could get down there for a ride, could do that. So really fortunate to have that. And then the Trail 66 series was happening in New England then as well. So we had access to some downhill and dual slalom racing on kind of these just like scrappy rake and ride ski area courses that were really fun and challenging. And looking back on it, kind of that racing was as good then as racing is now. um and then became a yeah went to a national race and did good and made the national team and started racing for Giant Bicycles a few years later and kept doing it. So I was not terribly involved in trail building other than as a kid, we just rode ATV trails around here because that's what we had, and in Bangor, some old survey lines, basically. But was fortunate to travel and appreciate trail building around the world, racing the World Cup circuit and national series, and always had a really strong appreciation for trail building. So as soon as I was done or felt like my racing career had run its course, I was really excited to shift into trail advocacy and building and maintenance and just supporting the vibe.
Awesome. Max, had
Yeah,
you go ahead.
yeah. I also went the cross country racing route to get into mountain biking, but definitely did not find the success that Adam had on the national and world stage. So I kind of stuck to the local high school race league in Maine, or in New England, which was a bunch of the like private prep schools would host races. And so I started racing with the Gould Academy's team when I was in, I think, seventh grade. Um, because my dad at the time was the coach of the Gould High School team and also owned the bike shop Bethel Bicycle, which is now Barker Mountain Bikes. So he was kind of my intro into mountain biking. Was he was a coach, he had the bikes, he had a shop. So as I got more and more interested in it, I kind of, started riding, started racing, wanted to get faster at racing, but didn't really want to do hill climbs. So instead we built more and more technical trails to ride on and get better at riding our technical races. But I also had Sunday River Bike Park in my backyard when it was open, and perfect for me was that it decided to operate middle school through the end of high school for me. So I got to ride Sunday Rivers, similar rake and ride trails growing up. So that's kind of how I found mountain biking, and also trail building at the same time. Was like always looking at people's trails around and seeing what could be done differently or more sustainably or just more fun. Especially starting out, fun was definitely the key to building trails in mountain biking.
Do you guys think you would have been as serious about mountain biking or gotten as, I guess, involved with it if racing wasn't part of it?
I found racing to be extremely important in building my community in mountain biking. So for me, if I didn't find racing, I probably would have ridden, but it would have been harder to get as into it as fast as I did, just because I was surrounded by people who wanted to ride all the time, and that's all we did was ride all the time.
Yeah, racing's definitely a handy and convenient catalyst, and certainly always has been for, the last few decades. Mountain biking has been a thing that people do. But it's awesome to see a shift kind of in the last decade or decade and a half, especially regionally with the growth of the New England Mountain Bike Association. And there's a lot of other things that are organized outlets for mountain bikers that you don't necessarily have to race to join a community. You can go to a volunteer trail event, or you can go to just kind of like a ride festival weekend or group rides or whatever it may be. So racing is an awesome catalyst, but it's great that it's not the only catalyst anymore.
Mhm. Awesome. So, I mean, how did that transition happen from racing to trail building? Is that something you felt was going to be fairly natural? Did you kind of find it by accident? How'd that kind of come about?
Um, I mean, for me, it was basically kind of as soon as I, decided to stop racing in 2017. I was living in Oregon. Maine, lovely Maine winters, as mild and balmy as it is now. I actually went for a pretty decent road ride yesterday evening. Wasn't the year-round training location. So I moved out west, lived in Oregon, and basically as soon as I got done racing, the Oregon Timber Trail was becoming a thing. So joined that a nonprofit group and board of directors, and helping kind of get a 700-mile backcountry mountain bike route through Oregon going. And kind of immediately it was just like, oh, all of the capacity that I've formally dedicated to making myself wicked fast can be dedicated to creating experiences for people. And it felt really good. Like it's yeah, you can work even harder at trail building than you can at training, it turns out. What a relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found the transition. I mean, I wasn't racing much before I started building. I honestly think I started building before I actually liked racing. Um, so I went into building some of my first builds were actually at Sunday Rivers Bike Park with Steve Belanger and Paul Marshall and Micah Emery, who I don't know if any of those people are logged on right now, but I think I was 11 or 12, and um, wanted a pass to ride the downhill park. So my friend Kyle and I volunteered on their trail crew in the spring and would come out on the weekends when we weren't in school. And I mean, we probably weren't super helpful because we were 12, but it felt like we were doing a lot of work, and we got our passes. And that was kind of how it's like we paid to play a little bit. We dug and we got to ride because of it. And then also we had an awesome ski coach at Gould named Jeremy Nellis, who owns Wanderous Trails, who's built a lot of the cross country stuff in Bethel. I think he's also done some projects in Falmouth and the Portland area. But he saw my two friends and I wanting to dig, and he kind of brought us out in the woods with him and showed us a little bit more like, hey, if you're going to dig, you should build stuff with drainage and, you know, whatever. And we eventually ended up working with him to build Gould's. It's called the race loop. It's pretty much Gould's cross country race loop. That was our first trail project. So as we built that, we also got to race on it. So it was inspiration to build stuff again that other people maybe weren't necessarily going to be able to ride their first try, because that gave us a leg up in the racing world. But yeah, they definitely went hand in hand, racing and building, and just riding and building. It's like the more we wanted to ride, the more we wanted to build. And it just seemed like a logical progression. It's like if we didn't do it, we would either be waiting for someone else to do it in the way we didn't want it to be built or whatever. And so we just started doing it ourselves, and it was I'd say just as fun as riding for me, is going out there and cutting some trees down and building a trail.
I mean, it's super fun to run a chainsaw, let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, I'm sure you also have just, building trail for fun because, maybe you want to change something like that. Like, what was the transition from going from like maybe recreational or doing it as a hobby, or as a volunteer, to becoming paid for and like making a career out of it?
I think you got that, Max. Should I go?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, my transition from doing it for fun to doing it professionally, I'd say followed the course of anybody's summer job from high school turning into a career. Which, I mean, like, I started getting paid to build trails in 2015. Just doing handwork and moving stuff with wheelbarrows, just as a summer job in the summer after my senior year of high school. It was just like, I knew I liked to do it. I knew it was it paid better than working any of the other jobs around town, and I would get to work with my friends and do it for fun. So I kind of did it as the summer job thing, which I would say is semi-professional trail builder. But then after college, I was out in Oregon as well. I moved back, just because there was no work because of COVID out in Portland, Oregon. The jobs were all kind of shut down, and Jeremy Nellis needed an extra excavator driver for his project. And I'd have to say, for me, it was a little bit of timing, a lot of hard work in the past as my summer high school job, but coming back and realizing that I could be a professional trail builder full time, year round, totally opened my eyes and totally changed like how I looked at trail building a little bit. Like, I used to do it for fun, and then it was a good summer job, but then I was like, oh, like, if I do this right and treat my body well, I can do this professionally pretty long term. And so that's when I started, being a little bit more aware about how I was building and everything. And it worked out where on my first project, we did a good enough job that the people of Mount Abrams saw what we had going on and, asked advice. And eventually I ended up applying for a job there as a hand crew person. And after a few months, ended up in the lead operator position, and took over the bike park from there. So yeah, it kind of was a summer job that ended up turning into a pretty sustainable career. And I've been doing that for 5 years now. So just, yeah, summer job. It can actually pay out if you're young and listening. If you like your summer job, try hard. It might work out.
That should be the motto for all of this.
Yeah.
And gosh, Max said one thing in there that, like, observing, the development at Mount Abram, and especially under his, guidance, it's like really paying attention to the nuance of building, which Max and the crew there have done an amazing job of. Like, every turn and every feature at the Abrams Park rides perfect, because they build it with a caring hand, and then they test ride it, and then they test ride it again, and then change it. and then ride it lots and then change it again if it needs it. So yeah, I appreciate the nuance. I had kind of a different entrance. When I got done racing, I was still sponsored by Giant Bicycles, which was great to be able to step away from racing as your job and transition that into something else. And that was product development and, marketing initiatives and going to events. But a lot of it was like, hey, I want to be a trail advocate, a volunteer trail builder. So I spent, 5 years, 4 years in Oregon doing mostly volunteer trail work. As a person who was kind of getting paid by the bike industry, I felt strongly about doing as much volunteer trail work as I could because it was like that was just a way that, there's always we can always use more volunteerism. So if you're subsidized, then get out there. And eventually we did good enough work with the Oregon Timber Trail Alliance and Trans-Cascadia, both of which are nonprofits working on federal land out there, working on Forest Service land primarily, that we were approached by the Forest Service with Trans-Cascadia to manage a challenge cost share agreement, which basically is a nonprofit managing a grant funded trail build. So we got a project or a grant to rebuild and reroute a couple miles of the Mackenzie River Trail, which is kind of an iconic, really neat, long distance mountain bike trail and in the Cascades of Oregon. So I became the project manager for that on behalf of Trans-Cascadia. And then we worked with a contractor as well, Dirt Mechanics, who is a really great professional trail contractor in Oregon. And we worked together over the course of, fall and spring to, reroute this trail through a lava field. And it was awesome being out there working every day with the crew and learning a ton from those guys as professionals and also learning the kind of business side of, just managing that agreement and cooperating with the Forest Service and whatnot. So that kind of got me into the world of like doing it as a job, still supported by Giant, which is great. And then COVID, kind of same deal, ended up being back in Maine a bunch and became aware that Sugarloaf, where I grew up skiing and racing as a kid, like we always raced the Widowmaker Challenge there. And that was kind of one of my like breakout events as a 16-year-old. Was interested in developing a mountain bike park and developing trails for competitive events. So they kind of created a position for me there that has grown into, now there's we hosted an Enduro World Series 2 years after not having any trails in the mountain and got a room in the admin building that says Adam Craig Bike Park on the door. So there's a lot of different things that go into that bike park title. And it's been really fun learning more about the nuance of building on the mountain and also the permitting landscape and just funding and budgeting and working with a large corporation to make things happen for the community.
I love that it says Adam Craig Bike Park. That sounds so official. Does he have a business card that's the same thing?
I think it says bike park and it also says races and events.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, from a personal side, like I grew up in New England and moved out west and lived in the Northwest for almost 10 years and always saw that being like the mecca of mountain biking in some ways, one of the meccas. And then now to see, two Enduro World Series come to New England was just kind of shocking. Because, I guess, I never really thought about riding out there and being at that caliber. And now with like these bike parks and coming up as Mount Abrams, Sugarloaf, you have a lot of Vermont, North Conway really stepping up this like level of trail that, it seems so much more viable. So I guess like part of that is things like, coming to, building work for a bike park and, working for something with, maybe goals of an Enduro World Series or something along those lines or a more established race series. Like what is the difference there for building a park meant for that to like your local trail system?
Yeah, there's definitely uh, it's interesting seeing the development of gravity mountain biking and the kind of competitive gravity event scene, because it is really a different, just a different approach, and kind of is operated almost more as a business, which is awesome, and provides a lot of resources for development of these trails that are, would be harder to build on public land or private land with public access and whatnot, kind of community funded. So it's a matter of those event trails are fun to build and kind of almost easy to build relatively because it is more of a rake and ride vibe, but with a modern eye toward knowing that your race is going to be a mud fest because it's just always going to rain when you have people come to town. So having modern touches like really, secure drainage structures and really careful layout of the trails and trying to make those kind of double black diamond event or competitive event trails, withstand the test of time. And then the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is where we're going now at Sugarloaf, after a couple of years of pretty careful planning and work in the regulatory space, is that like beginner trail that really can put a person that hasn't ridden a mountain bike before on a lift and get them to the top of a mountain that they can, ride down with a coach or with a member of the community and safely get down and like really learn to ride a lot more quickly in that kind of controlled bike park environment space is really a neat opportunity. And then everything that fills in the middle ground, like, then there's the average 12-year-old that wants all the tabletop jumps all the time, which is great. That's what keeps people coming back. I want that too. So I'm sure if 12-year-old Max had a, blue flow trail with a bunch of 16-foot long tables, he would have been psyched.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also a big difference in the, like, not so much for the event, but the gravity park versus the local trail system is that, at a place like Sunday River or, Sugarloaf or Mount Abram, you're paying your $50 a day. I mean, eventually when the park opens with Sugarloaf, whatever the price may be, you're going to be paying your $40 to $60 a day to get on the lift at a bike park, which means that there is always continuous income coming into those trails theoretically. So a big difference between like your local, I don't even know what's a trail system, the Gorham trails. You guys do a lot of volunteer work on them, but I have a full-time like 11-person trail crew working for me for 6 months of the year, where all they have to do is fix and build bike trails. So a big difference, like Adam kind of said, for events, you can kind of, if you get your like layout right and your drainage structure right, you can kind of let the trail get abused a little bit and like the basics stay there. And at a machine built bike park, like on a trail like Whiplash, we're completely resurfacing that trail like once or twice a year. So like the difference in the sustainability of the trails between a bike park and like your local system is a little different. Like our goal is always to have the most sustainable trails so that we have to do the least amount of work. But we also know that we're allowed to have steeper lips, steeper bank turns, steeper grades in general, because we're going to have people there full time, continuously trying to fix them. And as you can see, like at Mount Abram, if you ride there at the end of the season with flashes, brake bumps, like we just don't fix it in the last 2 months because it's going to get wrecked over the winter. And we'll fix big problems or whatever. But the trails are often significantly less sustainable at a bike park than at your local trail system if they're built by comparable builders to start with. And also, we don't have to worry about two-way trails at Mount Abram ever. Like, I never have to build a trail that I'm like, oh, I hope someone can pedal up the landing of this jump. Like, no, I always get to build one-way downhill trails, which does take a lot of thought and like a lot of forethought and planning. So like there are definitely things you have to plan a lot more at your downhill park, but there's also some things that you just don't have to think about nearly as much as it. Like if I were to go build in Portland on public land, the process of the actual build would be significantly different, but the process of the layout would be probably fairly similar. I would just be trying to hit different guidelines like that. But yeah, our event trails that we race on are thrashed compared to our local trails in town that get enjoyed by, the intermediate families who are coming to enjoy riding their bikes and hopefully not spend any time in the hospital.
Yeah, and
Versus the racers.
like a good example of that in Carabassa Valley, we're really fortunate to have, a full-time trail crew that's employed by the town of Carabasset Valley that's managed by Josh Tauses, who's an awesome long time, he's been in the valley for the last 15 years building and developing that network. And they have an annual event, the Carabasset Backcountry Cycle Challenge, that is, a 50 or 100K endurance event. And it was a total mud fest this year because it was this year in an event. And all of the built single track trails that they built, most of those were built a decade ago, were perfect. Like you would know, it's kind of a funny cadence of the race is that you're on all these connector kind of like ATV trails or Nordic ski trails or whatever, old woods roads. And then when you get to the like pieces of trail that the town trail crew has built, they were kind of mint because they were built in a way that just was set up with a ton of rock armoring and the right drainage and everything to be, durable, permanent trails, which are, I guess, always kind of going to be my preference. I don't know. I love public trails that are free access, that are provided by the community, that anyone can just roll up anytime and enjoy. So it's really, it's great that those exist more and more around the state of Maine.
Yeah, I think when you touched upon a little bit there too is, talking about double black diamond and then, how you're building, the green trail at Sugarloaf. Like when laying out a bike park, how do you consider, like, what are the considerations you take to make sure you try to hit as many riders as possible? Do you need to separate the trail systems? Do you need to, have a percentage you want to have of like green versus blue versus black at all?
Yeah, I mean that's the process that we've been going through at Sugarloaf for the last couple of years, and we've been fortunate to have some great regional consulting help from Highland Trails down at Highland Mountain Bike Park has done an amazing job developing their utopia there, and they have a contracting arm that consults and developed Loon Mountain in New Hampshire's bike park, which Boyne also owns, and Boyne is really happy with that. So we were steered in Highland's direction, and I have known those guys forever anyway and respect what they do. So we set out of like, the beginner, like find your ride, teach people to ride terrain is the most important. So we have 9.1 miles of trail planned currently for the bike park. That's in addition to the current, kind of tech trails that we already have. And those are basically 1,100 or, 1,000 to 1,100 feet of vertical. So it ended up being, I think, what we're like 4.8 miles of beginner terrain and then 3.6 of intermediate, like machine built trail, and then whatever the balance is, 2 and change of expert trail that's excavated. And those will be like, big jump lines like Max is finishing up at Abrams now. And they're kind of grouped in pods. Like we're able to the beginners can basically depart their own way from the lift, and then they head down and they're kind of like lowest skiers, right? So they head straight for the mellowest terrain that we have access to immediately. And then there's a few different options in that area, from kind of a bit techie to more jumps to just kind of the like beginner trail, like learn to ride down a nice 5 foot wide, path basically. And then kind of you step up into a little steeper terrain, and that's where the blue pod is, that has more machine built but kind of single tracky stuff. And then the expert terrain kind of like is a bit more riders left, where we already have some of our current expert terrain. So it just kind of try to keep like with like as much as you can, just so that people can kind of find their ride and be comfortable in their environment. So we're really lucky to have had that like kind of blank slate and good guidance and the right terrain to make that happen in around all of the infrastructure challenges that are building at a ski area. God, I can't wait until someday someone in the Northeast takes advantage of this amazing terrain and geology that we have here and just puts a lift on a hill that doesn't have a bunch of snowmaking pipes and roads and huge ski trails and water bars and all that other stuff that you have to deal with, which we're happy to deal with, but it's not a virgin landscape.
They make for great jumps though.
Totally. Yeah, and we're using them.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess you look at like New England mountain bike. What I always remember being is like that tight, twisty kind of rake and ride single track. That's kind of how a lot of it formed. And now we've gone down this road of no bike parks and no flow trails popping up, even more so in like public riding areas, so forth. And like the prevalence of machine built trail. where do you see trail building going and trails going in the next decade or so?
Um, I definitely don't quite have the, I don't know, scope of the amount of trails I've seen over the amount of time that Adam has seen. But just from my last couple winters spending time down south, where the amount of money going into trail and trail infrastructure is like incomprehensible to compared to Maine. Like the amount of like the millions of dollars going into trails in Tennessee, West Virginia, Virginia, Arkansas, everywhere down here is just like dumping money into these greenways and like mini hubs almost, which is kind of where I see for the more urban setting of mountain biking. I see this being like a pattern that we will continue to grow on, where they will, instead of building a freeway through a city, they'll take that corridor and they'll make it a greenway pretty much, where there'll be like a paved bike path, but there'll also be like a asphalt pump track, a skills park, a couple miles of like pretty compact trail that might be, but it's like a lot of it's still kind of gravity oriented, where it's like one climb to multiple descents, because you can kind of, if you have any elevation, you can keep that compact. But in the more like, yeah, city settings, I definitely see more of those like skills jump park, but like still probably asphalt or some sort of hardened surface other than regular dirt, just because it's more sustainable. You don't have to do as much maintenance on it. So I see that being a big thing. But I also do see pretty much exactly what Adam just said becoming more and more popular is either shuttle or lift based bike parks that are not at ski areas, because the ski area does add like significant complications to putting in trails, especially if it's an operational ski area where you can't put massive jumps in the middle of the ski trail, because they would then need to cover that with snow. So I definitely see like, yeah, more small hubs in cities where like each neighborhood could have its own like area pretty much. And then, in Maine in general, where we don't have the population in most of the state, there's a lot of mountains that don't have much going on. There's a lot of towns that need to figure out how to make money, because as skiing dies and winter dies and logging and mills all kind of are, phasing out, there's going to be a lot of towns, and the state in general is going to be looking to put some money. So I'm hoping they can take at least some fundraising goals and government funding goals from the South and try to do something with our own unique New England spin on it. Because I think there's a lot of room in New England for the best riding on the best terrain. So it would be great. I'm hoping that in the next 10 to 12 years, we're going to see just people willing to invest in, the expensive stuff that we don't have. We have a lot of rake and ride trail, but we don't have a lot of like hubs where, if you go there, you're going to meet someone to ride with in the parking lot every time. Or you're going to be sitting on a shuttle meeting new people, talking face to face with them, and just like, so I don't know. I'm hoping that as we build more trails, we can also figure out how to just improve the quality of our community throughout the trails. So just good. I don't know. I'm a social rider. I like to talk to people when I ride. So I'm a big fan of lots of trail hubs and everything where you can meet people. But yeah, I think it's just going to be like figuring out how to make pump tracks and stuff like that as common and as accessible as skate parks or playgrounds. If there's something where a kid can ride their strider at every playground, you're going to see way more kids riding bikes in 10 years than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would absolutely echo and agree with like Max's observation of like more kind of, high density trail hubs in areas with access to population, whatever that population may be. And we're starting to see that, in some of these smaller, more remote Maine towns like Katahdin Area Trails is doing a great job of Millinocket developing that hub out of the NEOC on Hammond Ridge. And then also in Greenville, there's a bunch of development happening on Little Moose Mountain, which is such cool terrain that I, grew up hiking and just kind of being up there, skiing at Squaw in the winter. So it's great that that's all happening. It's funny, I went to a Penobscot region NEMBA chapter meeting in Bangor a couple of years ago now, and there was a guy that attended that were just they're great, delightful open board meetings that they just have at Slipping Gears at the one of the local shops in Bangor. And you can kind of see the horizon of kind of the coastal hills, like between Bangor and Bar Harbor from the shop. And there was a guy that they were kind of open the floor for just like suggestions for trails or whatever, and talked about some local initiatives and whatnot. This guy said, someday I want to see a trail that connects across that entire horizon. We all kind of looked out the window, and it's basically, kind of Bald Mountain and the hills of Dedham, and then kind of like out through Clifton and the airline area. And people kind of were just like surprised by the concept. He's like, we need to build a trail that connects people from the coast to down east or whatever it is, so like some actual distance trail connectivity. And having worked in the West on public land where that's kind of the one thing I miss. I like the riding in New England better than pretty much anywhere, just because it's so rough and tumble and interesting, and it's home, and I just really like, I'd love the riding here. The one thing that I miss is that ability to like ride around a mountain range, ride through a few passes, watch the landscape kind of change as you ride from like the desert into the rainforest or whatever it may be. And that takes federal land access or federal land volume to really create those experiences. But since that conversation, which I was like, man, that's a great idea. Let's try to figure out how to do that in the next couple of decades or whatever it's going to take. And since I've learned that, there's Great Pond Mountain Conservation Trust that has 5,000 acres of land down near Bucksport. And then there's a bunch of private land, but that has kind of a history of informal recreation access, whether it's just walking up the power lines or whatever it may be. And then Amherst has 5,000 acres of town public land that runs over these beautiful bluffs. And it's like, that stuff's actually kind of possible. So it'd be really neat to see that in a much longer range, much more complex kind of planning environment. But I think that would be really neat to take these kids that are going to ride their striders around the pump track and give them, a multi-day point to point, off-road cycling route that takes them across the state. So
Awesome. I mean, I feel like I'm hearing a little bit about like interconnectedness too, which is something that I really treasure. Say about the Kingdom Trails. They've really to kind of build this idea of like you can park your car for a weekend and then ride trail all over the place and not need to use your car, and it doesn't really exist as much here as does in other places. So yeah, I think the idea of interconnectedness is awesome, and the long distance routes as well. So I mean, we do have the Eastern Divide Trail comes through here now, which is super cool, but definitely have a different flavor as well. Cool. So we're kind of so usually around this point we start opening up to questions for audience members. If anyone wants to drop a message in the chat or raise their hand on the reactions to ask a question, it'd be great. But before we do that, I just want to ask, is there a trail that you guys have ridden that really inspires you, or something you really want to know that informs you in your building and your experience as a builder?
I'm going grease slapper at Mount Abram. Just a blue trail with amazing turn shape and radius. Like that's all it really takes to have a good time on your bike, is just being able to push your feet through a turn and come out of it going faster and plan for the next one.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a like my personal trail inspiration is always going to be something from Oregon or down here that's just fall line, steep, technical, super janky. That's like, what inspired me to build, Maxilla or any of the stuff off the top of Mount Abram. But in terms of like a trail that I actually want to build, like something similar, is probably Krusty's at Killington. They just do such a good job of getting that like flow through the turns, but tech through the high speed. It kind of makes you feel like a pro downhiller, even when you're just, the you're riding a blue trail, you just get to go full speed over routes, which you don't get to do very often. So I think that flow tech kind of world is something I'm inspired to try to figure out coming up here in the next few years at Mount Abram.
So, super cool. Well, thanks, guys. So Ryan Dunphy has a question. How's it going, Ryan?
Hey Dan, good to see you. And thanks to Adam and Max for building rad trails in Maine and kind of definitely stepping up the standard here, and inspiring just a greater kind of, certainly my own vision for doing crappy hand-built stuff in Falmouth. But we're working on that zone, Blackstrap and all that kind of North Falmouth area, and just thinking through. Curious to get your perspectives. Like, what is unique about the Maine topography, terrain, ecology that requires particular approaches to trail building, and like what would you kind of recommend your kind of volunteer crew folks in the various number chapters working on those coastal hills you're talking about really be paying attention to when they're trying to make drainage improvements or line out a new trail?
So some of the first advice that I heard from a longtime mentor in Oregon, this guy Paul Thomasberg, who just was raced the first mountain bike worlds and has been building trails for a long time, and he will open a safety talk at a volunteer work event with this every single time, is just to think like water, which I think applies even more here in northern Appalachia, where the mountains are so old and the movement of water is so defined and so kind of entrained in the landscape, that just really taking the time to observe what's happening on the trail and also what's happening around the trail. Oftentimes solutions are not right on the trail, or maybe not even 15 or 20 feet from the trail, but kind of looking at how to just really manage drainage structures. And also another Forest Service thing is that bigger is always, always, always better, because there's always going to be leaves that get in, plug things up, sticks, whatever, tire tracks. So just the bigger structures don't really take that much longer to build, and they're so much more effective. So kind of like your drain hump is 3 feet long, and then your dip is also 3 feet long. So your whole structure is kind of 6 feet long, which makes it kind of ride better as well. It like gives you opportunity to put a little more shape and flow into those things. So certainly think like water is something that I have in my mind every day when I'm on the hill, and certainly try to share. And also water flows, right? So just smooth round lines, whether it's turns or those drainage structures, like having everything be beveled nicely.
Awesome.
I would second everything Adam says, and also add additionally, what makes New England so unique is our rock and our like mineral content in our dirt. You're not gonna get traction like you do in New England in the wet pretty much anywhere else in the U.S. Just because we have so much of that granite, either full on granite or decomposed granite in our dirt. So use what nature has given us to make life easier. So instead of trying to remove every single rock, maybe just try to figure out how to use your rocks in a way where it makes it more fun to ride them, because it's a lot easier to move a couple small rocks into place to get up over a big rock than it is to move that one big rock out of place, and then it will forever look out of place on the edge of your trail. But yeah, and also keep your volunteer days fun. Like, if you've got a really crappy job, don't make your volunteers do it. Make the people if you have a choice. Like, I know having lots of hands and unskilled labor is helpful for doing the jobs you don't always want to do, but if you want your people to come back to each volunteer day, figure out a way to make it fun, either the building or like the before or the after. just figure out, yeah, and try not to give too many crappy jobs of hauling brush or just whatever to people who might want to go build a lip or something. So it's good to ask people what they are interested in before you get too far into the delegating of tasks at a volunteer day.
Cool. Thanks, y'all.
Add one thing to Max's rock comment, and a quick shout out to is rock is great. Use rock as much as we can. We use rock so much. Max and I did a really fun volunteer day at Great Pond Mountain this summer where it rained, I don't know, 2 inches while we were there, and we basically paved with rock an entire corner, and it came out great. And we knew exactly what we needed to do because it was so wet, and that structure is holding up now because it was the worst it could ever be. I think everyone had fun that day, right? Everyone had a good time.
Yeah, that's about as borderline as it could get before it stops being too much
fun. But using rock shaping tools is really, really key, and often is pretty quick in getting like that rock that just has a little high spot or whatever. And really all it is just a high point hammer and something to drive it with. You can, take bits of material off to make things fit nice. And there's an amazing, amazing resource for all those tools right here in Bangor, just down the road from where I grew up. This guy, Lester Kenway, has an outfit called Trail Services LLC, which he does a really delightful annual catalog that has a bunch of pages of like diagrams of rigging or just trail building techniques or whatever it may be, in addition to like everything you could ever need to do rock work. And a really awesome semi-retired, foreman for the Appalachian Trail Club and also up in Baxter Park. So certainly call up Lester and get some rock shaping tools, and it makes that process so smooth and really fun. And it's really neat for volunteers to see like, oh, I can just make these two rocks fit together in a couple minutes with some safety glasses.
Usually we're just moving them around individually for hours trying to get them to all fit together. So awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. So Calista Finks has a question.
Hey guys. Hey Max. Hey Adam. Thanks for making the time today. I have a bit of a selfish question. And Max, you talked about pump tracks being more prevalent. Any plans to put one at Mount Abrams anytime soon?
we don't have any plans to do a straight up pump track, just because they are really expensive and pretty hard, and you need a pretty flat surface. And at the end of the day, like, it probably wouldn't make us any money as a bike park compared to what, I mean, it could, but there's other stuff we're focusing on first. But we are hoping this summer to put in like a more comprehensive multi-jump, multi-drop skills area near the bottom of George's Jungle up in those woods. So it won't be a pump track, but it should be like a cooler skills area. We're just praying, keeping our fingers crossed for not 50 inches of rain this summer.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be nice, probably, right?
But there has been conversations of the Bethel area in general. I've had a few people come up to me from a few different organizations asking just basics. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a pump track around here pretty soon.
Yeah, we're definitely working on plans for a permanent one in Carabasset Valley, working with our kind of, all of our advocacy groups in the area through the Carabasset Valley Trails Coalition to get a good solid permanent pump track in, which is awesome. It's needed. And ideally it will be not right at Sugarloaf, but somewhere kind of in the community trail system that's accessible.
Awesome. So my colleague Anne has a question.
I think you sort of touched on this and with the idea of think like water, but what do you feel the relationship is between the environmental concerns and trail building? Because on one level, it's so fantastic to get people out and experiencing the woods, and then balancing that with your stewardship of that space.
Yeah, I mean, so in being environmentally conscious is probably the most important thing when you're building out in the woods, because we all want to be out in the woods on bikes or on feet to enjoy the beauty of nature. So building mountain bike trails is more similar to building hiking trails, but also with the like engineering of roads, kind of. So if you come out on a mountain bike trail project as it's in progress, it will look like a disaster, like within 10 feet of your excavator. But pretty much like when you're building a trail, you're always thinking with the water, you're moving a lot of dirt, especially when you're building a bigger jump line. You're exposing hundreds of square feet of dirt with absolutely no infrastructure in it other than natural rock and surface. So you do have to use techniques to keep your landings from washing out as you're building them, and the sides of your jumps and stuff. The technique that we use a lot is just recycling our organic layer off the surface and respreading that again on the surface when we're done, of everything near the trail that's not actually the surface of the trail. To keep any dirt that moves from the surface, it'll trap it on the edge of the trail. It'll keep it from hopefully entering the waterways and affecting any riverbeds or stuff. But there is a lot, I mean, you also have to be very careful because we are running heavy equipment in the woods. So every time you're breaking a hydraulic line or filling up your diesel or doing anything that's got petroleum products that can damage the waterways, you have to be pretty careful about having spill mats and kitty litter and like making sure that when you're in an area that has the laws that you need to follow in terms of environmental regulation, you have to follow those laws. Luckily, at a ski area, like Adam said, it's not untouched terrain. We're not working in pristine nature. We are working at a place where they've pretty much clear cut ribbons down the mountain, bulldozed all the natural waterways, and filled in holes with rotten stumps. So, you know, as you're building in those conditions, it's a little different than if you were building out like in, you know, the White Mountain National Forest. You would be following a different, you'd have to follow whatever the National Forest Service has as the regulations. But in Maine, if you're building on private land, you just have to get your permits and follow like the basic guidelines that the Maine Department of Environmental Protection lays out, and the Army Corps of Engineers has their requirements too. So once you do all your permitting, then it's kind of just following the rules in the books in terms of environmental protection and hoping that you're doing your part.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Cool. So we got one question. I got Robert Benton, then I'll go to Alvian. So Robert, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Max.
Hey, Rob.
I've had the pleasure of building trails with Max and riding bikes with Adam. But Max, I'm curious, since you're down south this winter, what inspiration are you bringing home this summer? What are we gonna build?
The South is pretty cool. I definitely recommend any of you who want to escape winter, come down south and check out the riding. It's pretty special. I'm trying not to bring too much inspiration home with me from here because the dirt here is bottomless and endless and doesn't have rocks in it. So the jumps and the features that we can build here are semi out of the question in New England in a lot of places. But yeah, just, you know, always improving my landscaping and shaping and stuff. So hopefully when I get back, we won't have to do handwork anymore.
Nice. Awesome. Alvin, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I'd like to be a mountain biker, but I find the hills are really hard to go up and the darn trees are awfully close together coming down. So anyway, I settle for the road or gravel, and I represent the Sunrise Trail Coalition. And that's essentially a dirt road, old rail bed that goes from Ellsworth to the middle of nowhere in Ayers Junction. And we're trying to get it to connect to Calais in Canada, but that's another project. We'd like to have a gravel ride in August. We're working with the Dennisville Snowmobile and ATV Club. So I just want to know who I should be talking to. The Sunrise Trail is a great place to connect to mountain bike places, but of course it's kind of flat and more like a gravel road. So we thought a gravel bike ride would be good because we share the trail with the ATVs and horses and pedestrians. And I like to get a lot more bicycles on it. So anyone that can lend a hand or give me directions who to talk to, I'd be happy to. We need to get the word out once we pick a date and come up with a cadre to put this thing on. So looking for a little help here. Thank you.
Yeah, really great to hear that you guys are trying to get an event going on the Sunrise Trail. I'm familiar with the Sunrise Trail. It's great to see that, there's a lot of ATV trails in Maine, and it's great to see some, promotion and cooperation with the non-motorized user group to have access to some of those resources. We've gone on just some short walks on that with my old man, and I haven't actually ridden on it, but it's great that it's there. There's definitely some good gravel events kind of around central Maine. Checking in with the Penobscot chapter of the New England Mountain Bike Association is certainly a good one. And then a good friend, kind of my original mountain biking buddy, Justin, puts on a gravel ride up in Milo every year, called the Terror at the Trestle, which is funny. We ride across a railroad trestle across the Piscataquis. It's not that scary. And a big part of that's actually on the old railroad bed up there. And then there's also there's a good is at the Pine Tree Gravel is kind of down just inland from Belfast area. That's a really solid event as well. So I can shoot you a note with a couple of contacts just to kind of get on the schedule, make sure you're not on top of another event, and have just have people come. But people would totally be psyched to do that.
Thank
yes,
you,
good.
Adam.
Yeah, great.
You're from Bangor, and I'm a member of the Great Pond Mountain Conservation Trust and live in Orland. So, and I do have a bicycle that the only motor on it's me. So, but is there any gravel biking in Maine? I mean, there's gravel biking all over the country, and Maine seems to be, maybe too rocky and tree studded. But what's going on in the gravel bike world?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's lots. We have lots of just, kind of backcountry roads and whatnot. As far as like, specific resources, actually Great Pond Mountain, it's a bit hilly, but the Hot Hole Valley parcel, kind of, the east side of the Great Pond Mountain lands, access from Route 1 there, and also from Bald Mountain Road to the north, has a bunch of really beautiful, just all the old logging roads and whatnot. So there's certainly momentum, for gravel riding. And I think a lot of the mountain bike advocacy groups are seeing a lot of riders that are into it. So it's developing. And great that, thanks to Sheila for the note in the comments there that the Maine Sports Commission is keen to help with gravel riding. It's certainly a really like a growing and, just like you said, an accessible version of our sport that's on decent trail or decent routes.
Thank you.
Grow to the Bicycle Maine host a gravel ride in Millinocket every year, the Backwoods Rambler. It goes around the Twin Lakes. But yeah, I mean, we'd love to chat with you as well, see if we can support an event up there. We are a statewide organization and love to promote more gravel riding. So awesome. Well, we're just about time. Does anyone else have any other questions? Anyone else want to throw out there? If not, I have one last question for Adam and Max, if you don't mind. So I guess as trail builders, what do you wish trail users would know? It's a little loaded, I know.
Yeah. Do you want the grumpy version or the positive version?
How do you find like a nice in between, or like a little Little League sandwich?
I think, you just want trail users to know that the trails are there for them and that there's information available to help them use the trails in a way that supports the trails and the culture around them.
Yeah, I would say, like, honestly, when I see a kiosk that tells me how much money they've invested in their trail network, I always am blown away by like just the price it costs to build. I don't necessarily want to see dollar signs on kiosks everywhere, but just the general appreciation that trails do take a lot of time, effort, and money. So sticking to them and not building or skidding in like cut through lines is really helpful. You know, if it's a good trail and it doesn't need a switchback cutoff, then it would have been designed with a switchback cutoff if that was better in some way, probably. So just stick to the trail, pick sticks up, reach out to your local trail advocacy group to see if there's volunteer days. Just, yeah, the more involved you are with trails, the more fun the trails are. So I just want people to know the more they put in, the more they get out.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time and for chatting today. It's really just awesome to hear about what you guys are up to, you know, just hearing about the growth of trail building in Maine and, you know, how mountain biking trails are just becoming more and more prevalent and just how they're evolving. Super cool. So, I just want to thank everyone again, for coming, and thank you for Tandem Coffee Roasters for supporting this. We do have another another webinar coming up, and I forget the date of it. It is the it is the 21st. February 21st, we'll be hosting a couple of groups to talk about creating inclusive cycling communities. So how to make your group ride more accessible to people, more welcoming, and yeah. And we can always go to bikemaine.org to see more about our upcoming events. Thank you again, Adam and Max. It's been awesome, and we'll definitely chat with you. Well, hopefully we'll see you out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for the platform.
Yeah, thanks
All the
everybody for
work.
tuning in.